Hi guys, I'm Chris,
And I'm Mike.
and this is the No Limits of Mitch Rapp podcast. So how you doing today, Mike?
Oh, I'm good. I got my little Yoda bobblehead with me. Well, actually, Baby Yoda, the child, just
Ooh.
came in the mail. I think it was part of May the 4th. Star Wars wanted to make sure to get these things out, you know. I think, if I recall, I got the package on May the 4th. It was pre-ordered for a while.
Nice. Yeah, we
Yeah.
celebrated May the 4th. My son is very into Star Wars, and so we celebrated it by watching, although not a great movie, but he wanted to watch The Rise of Skywalker, so he was
Okay.
watched it like 15 times already. He's only 3.
He's probably watched that more than most Star Wars fans, to be honest with you, who probably watched it once and said never again.
Definitely. That's another podcast.
Hey, well, for our Twitter roundup, got some responses to our hashtag Rapp origin stories. Shout out to a couple of big readers. I'm learning a lot by following you guys online. We have at Stuart Jash, StuartJash. Man, this guy is awesome. He's been tweeting at us, telling us how much he's reading. And his origin story was similar to Vince Flynn. He had a difficult time reading, through his earlier years, a little hesitant to become a reader. And we know, as we talked about in the Origin episode, Vince Flynn suffered from dyslexia in his case and wasn't a big reader, but eventually knew he wanted to become a writer. Well, Stuart Jash in 2012 picked up Transfer of Power. That's the next one we will be reading and reviewing on this podcast. He even back in 2012 screenshotted a picture of the warning page right in the beginning in Transfer Power, how they warn the Secret Service protocols and White House security details have been changed. Vince Flynn omitted a lot of those details to respect the privacy of the protection details. And Stuart Jash, he tweeted that years ago when he first got into these books. He says since he's been reading 200 books a year, which,
Wow.
yeah, again, is just, there's a serious community of readers out there that I want to learn from. I've been learning a lot already in just a few weeks of Twitter.
I'm lucky if I get 30, 40 books a year.
I think my Goodreads goal is hovering usually, right where you said, around 30 books a year. And I think I hit it most years. One other origin story we got online, shout out to follower at Evil Rap Lady. Love the handle, love the nickname.
Love that name. Love that name.
She has a similar origin story I've been hearing a lot about online, who found out about the movie premise, picked up on American Assassin, and has been hooked ever since. And I guess thankfully for a lot of people, that's a way to find Mitch Rapp and get into the series.
Yeah, any way you can come, we're happy that you came to the series.
Yeah, so it's a whole world out there. I'm looking forward to meeting more people and really getting the Twitter game going.
Nice. So what are we going to be covering today, Mike?
Today we are wrapping up term limits. It is part 3. We are going to get through in just the first few minutes the ending of the book, how it wraps up. We'll call that our wrap up and final thoughts on. See what I did there?
I like that.
Then we'll spend some time on the zero-sum game, sharing our winners and losers from Vince Flynn's first novel.
Nice. So we start off chapter 30 with Kennedy really deducing that the assassins from the first murders, she believes that he let himself be seen on purpose as a black man in order to get them off their scent. And so now she believes that he's not black and that they need to sort of retool who they're looking at and who they need to be pursuing further. I thought that was interesting. That's our girl, Kennedy. She's always has the right answer. Seamus,
Yeah, I was just going to say the investigation was in danger of going down a rabbit hole that the assassins wanted to send them on by only looking at former special ops and SEALs and Army Rangers who were African American. And for Kennedy, she quickly realizes, why would they let us know that information?
right. I thought it was interesting how there was only 2 black Navy SEALs, which is there was much more in the other different branches. And so obviously, I don't know if that was on purpose because Scott Coleman is a Navy SEAL, our assassins are Navy SEALs. So.
Well, I think that's what Kennedy is picking up on. She's picking up on, if they didn't want you to, if they were SEALs, they would pick a profile and a demographic that wouldn't necessarily point you to the SEALs. And it so once again shows Vince
Right.
Flynn's knowledge of the inner circle, knowing that the data would be less for Black SEALs, and so the investigation would quickly then look at Army Rangers and other special operations
Right.
outside of the SEALs. And so Kennedy is saying, something doesn't rub me right if the only mistake these guys made was being seen in a park by some bystanders. Why would they do that? And she requests the file of these 19 SEALs that she does want to investigate further.
Right. And then we quickly turn back to Seamus and Coleman and O'Rourke. They're informed about Arthur, and they learn that Arthur used to run Dark Ops, and that they know of some SEALs who have worked for Higgins, but they want to make sure that it's Higgins who have performed these newest murders of Turnquist and Olson before they take him out, which is, they want to sort of dot their I's, cross their T's. And so they go on this recon trip to Arthur's house, and it's there that they see Mike Nance show up. And I thought this was interesting. And one of the elements, the themes that we're going to talk about later is this idea of hubris is going to be a theme we're going to talk about later, in this idea of hubris and characters that have hubris and how that gets them in trouble. He's in the state-of-the-art facility. It's super secure, but because of his addiction to smoking, allows him to go outside, and that's what allows them to see him and to see him meeting with Nance. And so that he thinks that he's, untouchable.
Yeah. The recon mission itself is set up pretty cool because Arthur has a very advanced technology and security system surrounding a rural mansion in Maryland, but it's on the bay, on the Chesapeake Bay. And so Scott links up with a couple of buddy SEALs who turn out to be the ones on his assassin team. And so now we meet all the assassins, and they bring Michael O'Rourke into the fold. They let him come on this recon mission with them. And so the four of them use a boat, scuba gear, and they wade into the rocks. One of them sets up in a tree that's hidden at a view of the guards. Another one is wading down by the rocks at the base near the water, and they are able to observe, like you said, what the heck is the National Security Advisor and Chief of Staff doing in the middle of the night, smoking a cigar with this guy who has a history of being pushed out of the CIA for going too far. I mean, when you say pushed out of the CIA from going too far, that's exactly what our heroes, Mitch Rapp and others, are going to do, and we love them for, and we need them to do. And so if this guy is really that bad running these operations, what the heck are these White House top aides doing with him smoking a cigar?
Right.
And so they decide, instead of killing Arthur, which might have been their plan of attack, so that he can't do these operations, they decide to kidnap him. That way they can get a little more information on what he's doing and what his relationship is to the White House.
Right. And so at the same time that this is going on, we have Kennedy, who's making this revelation about the Operation Snatchback in Libya that was leaked information, and it led to deaths of Coleman's team. And so we learn, like through various people and storytelling, that Fitzgerald at a bar was talking to a bartender, and this bartender thought they were talking to a reporter, which actually turns out to be a KGB agent. And that's how this information got out that led to the Coleman's men getting killed. It's this third theme that I'm going to bring up later, this idea of consequences, that every action in the political game has consequences. And, Fitzgerald, by blabbing, just saying this random information, doesn't think about the consequences that he could have by just having this single conversation.
How does this all get down to O'Rourke? Is that Senator Olson also knew about the mission, and Senator Olson caught wind that Fitzgerald was the one who leaked it in a bar. And so now that Olson trusts O'Rourke, O'Rourke feels he has a duty. If he knows why his friend Scott lost SEALs on that mission, O'Rourke says, I've got to let Scott know. It's my duty and my responsibility to explain to him who caused you to lose men on your mission and who caused your mission to be compromised. Guess who picks up on that at the very end of the book? Kennedy. She asks Michael O'Rourke at the very end, she says, did Senator Olson know about the leak? O'Rourke says, yeah. And Kennedy asks, did you inform Scott Coleman? Once again, Kennedy was just on it. And so she's already, I can't believe it, in the first book by Vince Flynn, she is set up to be the mastermind who is able to run Mitch Rapp.
Definitely.
I can't read this book and think of one other person here who I would say is comfortable running Rapp in the field.
It's a great introduction to Kennedy, and I think it's also a great introduction to Coleman. I forget which book is it next book or whatever book he's introduced with Mitch Rapp. There is some clarification. Well, I guess we'll get to it, but there is a clarification scene where Coleman is introduced with Kennedy, and they sort of talk about the events of this book. I guess we can save that for when we get to that part. But
I mean, they're going to have to explain why Coleman didn't go to Rapp as his partner for these assassinations. Of course,
right.
we don't have Rapp yet, but I'm saying some retconning. I wonder if we'll have to be looking for the clues in the breadcrumbs if we get any information about where Rapp would have been during the time of term limits later
I'm
on.
trying to think, like, he's definitely, because he's recruited like 2 years
20,
after college, right? Or like,
yeah,
and he's around Coleman's age.
yeah.
So definitely he's around and he's in the CIA at this time.
And,
So.
and Coleman's already served in the SEALs, as we've heard, countless missions.
Right. So, and when we meet Coleman in the Rap series, he's already set up his whole, I forget what the name of his company is, but it's like,
Yep.
Navy SEALs.
Something with demolition.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyways, but
Yeah.
yeah, it'll be
They set
interesting.
up this partner company where they're, taking contracts to do side work. And why would Mitch Rapp not be on that team in that company with Coleman?
Right.
Granted, he's not even a thought in Vince Flynn's mind right now, but
That's been bugging me this entire book. Like, where is Mitch Rapp? Like, why isn't he in this book? Why did he decide to? He has so many players that are in the Mitch Rapp universe, but not Mitch Rapp. It's just like, what did he not come up with it yet, or had he already had the idea?
I think as we do these reviews, we're gonna pick up on some crumbs. I bet he later leaves us some crumbs where we could put the pieces together on that. But we'll have to pay attention to it.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so.
So what we learn is that Arthur Higgins was captured and he's interrogated by Coleman and O'Rourke, and they get a videotaped confession of him saying that he was working with the White House, particularly Nance and Garrett, and they were the ones for the most recent 2 assassinations. We basically have O'Rourke able to turn that information over to the FBI without implicating himself. He says that it was left on his doorstep by the assassin, and they chose him because he didn't even know it, but they trust him, so they thought they can give him the information that could be passed on to take down Arthur Higgins and thereby the White House. Now, here's the thing. When they were done with Higgins and got the confession, I never considered they kill him in a real interesting way. They use a syringe, and I've always seen doctors put the syringe vertically in the air, squeeze a little bit of the liquid out,
That way you
and
don't get
that's
air
to get the air
bubbles.
bubbles out. I never considered what would happen if you do a syringe of just air into someone's veins.
Deadly.
I learned that it was deadly as we watch Arthur Higgins, very painfully die in this scene. Maybe it's what he had coming, but I thought you, as a scientist, could explain that to me.
Yeah, it's to that you don't like introduce air pockets into your blood.
Gotcha.
So you want to avoid that at all costs. I don't know the actual specifics if like a little bit of air got in, but I guess definitely a full vial of full of needle or full syringe full of air would do the deed.
Yep. So we have a couple of scenes here which are exciting in the Situation Room.
Yes.
And I think this is where if you weren't on Team O'Rourke yet, you better be now, because he is willing to call Garrett out on everything. So far, we've had a couple of players not willing to go so far as to say Garrett is the problem and to say it in front of the president.
Right.
And now we get O'Rourke. Now that we have these tapes and these confessions, anything Garrett's going to do to weasel out of it, O'Rourke's going to call him out on the spot.
Yeah, so they dumped the body specifically on Garrett's lawn, and they really want to see Garrett and Nance sweat. And there's a point in the book where Stansfield picks up on Garrett's nervousness, and he uses his CIA spy tradecraft, always observing. And Nance is depicted multiple times as being very similar to your typical spy. He likes to be quiet. He stands on the side of the room. And I imagine knowing who Thomas Stansfield is, we get introduced to him. I think he's in like 5 of the books in the Mitch Rapp series. he would, be able to pick up on these traits very easily. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, Nance even tries to literally slap Garrett out of his face and says, "You fool, in that meeting, you were looking at me the whole time. You were sweating. Was it a mistake to let someone like Garrett in on the secret or partner with him when all of these tells would point to would implicate him in the situation?" And so, yep, Stansfield is onto them.
Right. And I feel like that was a bad call. You shouldn't have trust Garrett.
Right. You jump ahead though, and Nance is ready to. He's almost. You see the breakdown of Nance. He's the
Yeah.
national security advisor. He is also. I forget if he was military background, but he was also
He was in the NSA.
very well trained on these sorts of issues. Yet he kind of loses it.
You see a big transition in like the character of Nance going from kind of in the background shadows, and then he's like freaking loses it in this last, probably 5 chapters or whatever.
What's cool is when O'Rourke is taken, you see the CIA war room go into action. It describes Stansfield communicating with the floor operator back at the CIA, who's getting satellites, prepping teams, and doing a mission debrief on Nance's ranch. And so they're observing the Nance ranch, expecting that that's where O'Rourke was taken.
Right. And so we get this whole scene where O'Rourke has been taken to the Nance Ranch, and he knows that O'Rourke knows that Nance is going to use some sort of drug on him, so he tries to stall.
Seamus hears that it might have been Nance who got him and alerts Coleman, and Coleman is just ready to go off. He wants to get in the game, but he's being tailed.
Right.
The FBI is pretty much on him, and so Coleman has to do a number of aversion tactics to get his FBI tail off of him. So Coleman ends up getting to the Naval Academy, where he's in Annapolis. They drive out of DC, and Coleman knows this is where I can disappear. He talks to the guards, he gets inside, and the Naval Academy guards actually stop the FBI agents tailing him, and they're going to wait for clearance to let the agents into this area.
I thought that was really cool. I thought
That
was
was
cool.
cool. And meanwhile, Coleman is like the big shot on campus, going down to see his buddy at the docks. His buddy has arranged a ride for him, a boat that he's going to let him take out for a few hours. And his buddy's going to say, "I don't know, I haven't seen this guy." And it's totally this network and relationships he's built up through the military. He's cashing in on that now, his reputation.
And so he uses this cover in order to escape from the FBI. And I liked how he's able to, through a series of phone calls, he wants to talk to Stansfield. Stansfield's with Nance. And I really like what do you think about the Nance's death?
Yeah, I think Stansfield planned a great operation in the CIA, getting into the house. We get a pretty heightened scene, really intense, of O'Rourke is getting tortured, and they are about to use this truth serum on him, which it was very clear in the text could cause permanent, lasting brain damage. And it's at that moment that O'Rourke is taking the beating. He's holding out. He realizes that by antagonizing his captors, he can keep them going and buy himself some time. So O'Rourke is just being brave, spitting back, and really holding up to the interrogation. At which point, CIA, they break in, they execute their mission perfectly. In comes Stansfield to rescue Michael, and they capture Nance as well. And so now the question is, what are you going to do with the national security advisor who you have evidence was involved in 2 assassinations of government officials, and now also the third, a kidnapping of a third congressman? And so Stansfield, right as he's having to make this decision, gets a call. And it's our friend Coleman. And Coleman wants to meet with both of them. He says, "I don't want anybody tailing you. I want you on a chopper with Nance and O'Rourke." And he gives them coordinates to meet out on a peninsula in the Chesapeake Bay. I did look that one up as well. It was pretty well detailed. It was about an hour east of DC, out south of Annapolis. And Coleman takes this boat off the coast of this peninsula, finds a small island. Stansfield lands with a helicopter.
Yeah, and we get after a brief interaction, Stansfield sort of suggests, it'd be better not to not to shoot him, but instead to kill him the same way that you killed Fitzgerald, or like the assassins killed Fitzgerald. And it's interesting how then they use this to explain away his death by being thrown off a horse. And these last like 5 chapters really show the strength of Thomas Stansfield and the CIA. I like how this book sort of takes us through. We go through the assassins, we go through the like the parts of the FBI, and then at the very end, we're shown like this I mean, yes, the CIA is operating on domestic soil, but it's a very cool experience with the Stansfield and the power of the CIA and that aspect. I like that.
They even have these references to how many people they're going to have to tail. And Irene Kennedy is like, we have the resources. And
Yeah, yeah,
Director Roach of the FBI keeps wondering, how are you able to tail 40 different people and keep tabs on it? And Kennedy again 2 or 3 times says, we can do it. We have the resources. And this is 1997, so really before drones, really before high resolution satellite imagery. I'm sure there's some, but Kennedy is saying, we've got the means. She doesn't say the personnel, she says, we've got the means. So who knows what kind of tactics she's relying on. Now,
right.
I don't know if you picked up on it, but where do we learn that the CIA put out the story that Nance was thrown from a horse and killed? That's the cover story.
It's Liz and Mike are out at the airport, right?
Yeah, they're flying out of Reagan National, and I feel like I'm always telling these stories. It's a
These are
pretty
great.
efficient
They're great.
airport. It's great. It's connected to the metro. It's actually right outside DC on the Potomac River. It's pretty easy to get in and out. And they're mentioning this one gate that a lot of congressmen use when they're going flying home to their districts, Gate
Right.
35X. Gate 35X is a rip, man. And by the way, Reagan's building a new terminal to replace 35X, but you basically go down an escalator, you get on a shuttle bus, and it goes out onto the tarmac, and you load from the tarmac, and you can have anybody on your flight with you because they're shuttles. They go out pretty much every hour to a bunch of major cities on the eastern seaboard.
Okay.
And one day I was flying out of there. I was in 35X. You know what I see the next morning on the paper?
What?
A photograph, it's the same time I was boarding, of Robert Mueller and Donald Trump Jr. standing next to each other awkwardly in line.
Oh, that's
And
awkward.
I was
That's
literally,
awkward.
I was just off the frame of the photo boarding a separate flight. And it was the height of the Mueller
Oh wait,
investigation.
you were like right there?
Well, I didn't notice them or anything. It was the next day I saw the picture. And the picture was dated at about the exact time where I was also flying. And
Wow.
and so Reagan Airport is, if you just buy a ticket and pretend you're flying, and you can just sit there and people watch. I mean, another day we were going to Burlington, and Rosie, my wife, she looks up and she taps me and she, look, sitting right across in the lobby with big headphones on is a really tall guy, bald with white hair. It's Bernie Sanders.
That's funny.
And we see 3 people walk up and shake his hand and say, thank you for your service. And I'm like, oh, 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 oh. And
It's
it was
Bernie Sanders.
another day, someone's taking selfies behind me in line. I turn around, it's Stacey Abrams, the Democratic candidate who
Right.
lost for the race for governor.
Right.
And she also gave the Democratic response to one of the early Trump State of the Unions. And so she was behind me taking selfies in a line. I was flying to Atlanta. So
It's
pretty
crazy the
crazy
people that
stuff
you
coming
see
out of
coming
Reagan.
out of DC. Yeah.
Well, that's the book, and they see that Nance has died, and the story is he fell off his horse, at which point Liz taps Michael and says, how did they fake? And Michael says, we don't know anything. And they board their flight and enjoy their time together as a couple.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you, Vince. And so now we're gonna do our wrap up of the book Term Limits. And so, what do you think of this book, Mike? It was pretty long, over 600 pages, kind of long for a thriller.
Yeah, I felt that as I was reading it too. You know, looking back, there were these parts I was just slogging through, trying to get through, trying to keep up the network of characters because we had a lot of backstory for a lot of different people. So wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but I did feel the length. I did feel that this was lengthier than what I read in the genre quite a bit, and a lot of later Vince Flynn and Kyle Mills books. You know, this one felt like a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, I guess the reason maybe it was so long is because of, like you said, the amount of characters that we are introduced to in this book and the backstory that we get on every single character. And I feel that going forward, we don't really in Vince Lynn's books, we don't really get that much depth into this many characters. You know, we're gonna get introduced to characters along the way, but not necessarily 20 different characters and learn about each of them in the amount of detail that Vince does. So
I
yeah,
agree. It was like this was a testing ground or a proving ground, kind of like I think we talked about earlier. Imagine this canvas. It's kind of like the Jackson Pollock of throwing different characters and their stories at the wall, seeing what sticks. And what's kind of cool about that is I started Transfer of Power, the next book we're going to get into, and right off the bat in chapter one, you immediately know who stuck, who made it on that final canvas, and who's
yeah.
sticking around. As we know, it's going to be Dr. Irene Kennedy and Thomas Stansfield of the CIA. You meet them right off the bat in Transfer of Power. So I feel like they were the winners. We see a lot of characters later, don't get me wrong, but I just thought it was interesting how Transfer of Power really made me think, yep, these are the two he decided to keep running with.
Well, and you can almost see that in the end of this book, right? Like the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 chapters, like I said earlier, are really where Thomas Stansfield sort of shines, and Irene Kennedy. I mean, she was shining the whole book, but the last 4 or 5 chapters are all about the CIA. You know, the beginnings of what Vince Flynn is going to talk about with the CIA and that kind of stuff. And so you could see that maybe that's where he was enjoying writing that, and so that's what continued him on to keeping those characters and building more upon them.
That's
Interesting to
right.
note, like why wouldn't he have chose to stick with the character of Michael O'Rourke? Like he's a pretty interesting character. He's his congressman. He doesn't necessarily want to stay. You know, he could have chose that guy to write a series off of.
I think that would have been a great idea if his writing was going to take more of an approach to politics and standing up for your values in a more political way or diplomatic way. I think he definitely was what we loved in that end. But I feel like his shortcomings for where Vince wanted to go with a super agent, a super CIA trained assassin, I don't know if the background we were given on Michael would have fit that. I believe there was some injury in the Marines. He was pretty good
Right.
at doing special operations type work and his training with the Marines, but it didn't seem to be that caliber of a character that was going to play that role of super agent that really proves to us he's got the goods and he's going to be best in the world. Michael kind of also was a little too, his backstory on that was a little too tame, and he
Right.
was developed more so as this persona of in the public eye, which he didn't like, but that's where he was pigeonholed in term limits, which holds him back from taking on that role that Mitch Rapp will assume.
Right. And so I just wanted to discuss to you like some of the themes that I thought really stood out in this book that I think that Vince was trying to convey. And the first one throughout the whole book was pretty prevalent is this idea of good versus evil, and there's a fine line between good versus evil. And I think that there are characters that tend to go back and forth. I mean, you can argue with me what, are the assassins good or are they evil? In the end, I feel like their actions were justified, but in some instances. But yeah, what do you think about the idea of good versus evil in that line?
I think it was definitely played around with in the book. I think there were a lot of moral questions being asked. I guess I would say I was a little disappointed in how far they were taken. Some of the discussions around, was it appropriate for a trained assassin to turn on his own government? Well, obviously, if you believe in the Constitution, yes. But I just thought it could have been played out more of the nitty gritty of, does that mean assassinations could ever be justified? And I feel like it was left with this, yeah, kind of, sort of,
Yeah,
without truly really diving into the consequences of that. If you accept that policy, which it kind of assumed the readers are going to be okay with. I mean, Stansfield, the CIA director turns his head when someone who assassinated the Speaker of the House, third in line for the presidency, he actually is the one who suggests, why don't
right.
you
He's the one who
assassinate in front
suggested.
of me the national security advisor, Mike Nance? And I'm sure those kinds of extremes could happen, but the text didn't play with, should they be happening this way and what will be the fallout. I thought it could have explored more that territory.
Yeah, do you think like these types of books tend to go that deep? it'd be interesting to, when I first read these things, I'm just in it for like the action, but upon rereading them, I start to think about, what is the author really trying to say? Does he have other motives about, something that's happening in the real world? Does he have something to say about a theme, about something he really wants to drive home? So yeah, it'll be interesting going forward if we can pick those things out.
I think you're right. And I think the genre doesn't have to go that deep into each one of them, but I think it is what sets apart. Let's say an author writes 15 novels over their career. I think that's what's going to set apart the two or three that win big. They're all going to have amazing action scenes, amazing location data, amazing specificity on the tactics and the equipment being used. Like
Right.
that stuff is going to blow me away in every book. I think the two or three that are going to last for each author are the ones that do handle those themes.
Yeah, that
I
really
mean,
like develop a character well, that has this complexity of who he is, and
yep.
like you
I'll
said.
put it this way. Jack Carr, who's blowing up right now with his awesome series, it's really blowing up. He was on the Joe Rogan show and he talked about his writing process. He learned from one of his mentors, and he puts a post-it on his desk, visible at every moment of the writing process, and that post-it note has a one-word theme, and he wants everything he writes to relate to and be connected to and make sense around that theme. And so for his most recent book, it was revenge. And I'm thinking, I think that's what's going to make a book stand out, is if that theme is so well played out and developed, in addition to the action, which we all know is going to be awesome for a majority of these writers, particularly all Vince Flynn and Kyle Mills books. But I think sticking to that theme and exploring it fully is what's really going to differentiate a few. And I don't know if Term Limits gets there for me on issues of good and evil or issues of is violence ever justified. I think it dances with them. I just don't
Right.
know if it nails the landing.
Yeah. And I thought one of the other big points is this idea of consequences, and how every action has consequences. I mean, that's like literally what sets off this entire set of action. Someone in the government who has loose lips and they don't think about what they say, the difference between life or death. And so I thought that was a big thing, that every action has consequences and that you need to think about them.
That actually might, to me, stand out. That's a great suggestion as a stronger theme than some of the other ones we've discussed. I'm thinking about the amount of times law enforcement and or the Secret Service was ignored or downplayed in their expertise and the consequences that had on the administration and the White House. And then in that same vein, I'm thinking of the consequences even long term. A Senator Fitzgerald, Congressman Kozlowski, they're not going to get away with their actions and living lavishly and passing sham budgets and running up the debt. It will catch up to them eventually. And so I
Right.
think that's a great theme.
And then the last thing I just wanted to point out is the idea of hubris. And I think a lot of the characters sort of have hubris, and it is their downfall. Specifically, a lot of times the president seems to have a lot of hubris, and that tends to have a problem in his administration, as well as Arthur Higgins. It probably is what leads him to be, captured and die. So that was like sort of a small little theme I wanted to bring up.
I think Nance too,
Right, right.
being actually well trained, but
He's a spook.
he
He's,
yeah, and it's like Garrett is willing to put it in your face and tell you he's better than you and tell you what the business is, but Nance was secretly thinking that and planning
right.
it the whole time in the shadows in the background.
Yeah.
And he got what was coming, falling off that horse, right, cracking his neck.
And so I just had a series of questions a couple questions I wanted to ask you. Who did you think was the most noble character in out of this list, whether it be Michael O'Rourke, Scott Coleman, Skip McMahon, or Eric Olson?
Mm, that's a good one. I want to jump and say O'Rourke. He became a very likable character for his morals and value judgments. But I think Skip. I think
Yeah,
I'm
I'd
going
have to
with
go with Skip.
something about the way he handled his job, his responsibilities. It wasn't as in your face as O'Rourke, but he was willing to stand up to others. And I liked his relationship with his boss, Director Roach. He points out that Director Roach was younger than him, I think, joining the academy and getting into the FBI. But it was okay that Roach had this career ambition to move up the bureaucratic ladder and become director. And I liked how Skip kind of just stuck to his guns and said, "It's not me. I'm an agent. Keep me in the field, not taking a desk job. But you know what? I'll work for you. You're younger than me. I had more experience, but you could be my boss. We'll work together." It's symbiotic, and I think that was noble in itself, just to humble himself and say, "This is my role. This is where I see myself," and still be able to work well with his boss, Director Roach.
Right. So sort of the opposite of that. Who do you think is the most evil character in the story? Is it Garrett, Nance, Higgins, or President Stevens?
Garrett, right? Like Garrett's the low hanging fruit. Garrett just
Yeah.
stands out, but I want to look at it from a different angle. So what do you say?
I don't know. Secretly, I want to say Stevens because he's just like a dumbass. But I guess, he could just be aloof and not really know his choice. But I guess Nance, because Nance was like so calculating behind the scene, and he threatened to kill Stu. Like, where I don't know, Stu didn't have it to kill anybody. He was all talk, no game.
That's true.
And Arthur's pretty bad too, but
I was going to say Arthur because just think about the power he has to run these operations. And we later in the Mitrap series are going to appreciate directors and managers in the CIA who are willing to run those operations. But it seems like Arthur just went down a bad path with that secret power behind the scenes, where we later are going to see CIA directors and managers who wield that power and always keep the public good in mind.
do you think this book does a good job accurately portraying politics in DC?
I think after speaking with Andrew in our bonus episode, who worked closely on Capitol Hill with the majority whip, I think so. I do. Hearing about the press conferences and the role of the media and some of them negotiating and how these things go on, I think a relatively well done job exploring that. There are parts of it, of course, that are so far fetched, like any novel,
Right.
that I can't see. But that's even going to be something that comes up in our next bonus episode when we explore the theme of term limits and how was the actual constitutional history, was it represented accurately, could have been portrayed in a different way that is more important to what the boots on the ground try to influence legislation around term limits. So I feel like it was realistic, but there were some parts that obviously missed the mark. You're asking a lot of questions. I'm curious, how do you feel it was portrayed about the use of violence and revolution and the rights of the people?
Well, I think revolution doesn't necessarily have to be violent, right? A revolution could be just getting people out to vote and getting people to put the people you want into power that actually you think you believe in their stance, and you believe that they're going to accurately represent you, right? That could be a revolution in terms of changing, a seat, flipping it to your cause, whatever. You can also, I believe in protesting. I believe in, the right of free speech, all that stuff. So I don't necessarily agree with like the anarchy aspect of it. And like you said, I don't think that the assassins just sort of scratch the surface of it. Makes for a good thriller novel, but
You could also understand Coleman, we learned, being motivated by losing men due to a leak by one of these fat cats in Washington. So I could totally understand the personal motivation for it, but as a wider political philosophy for change, I don't think it has any place. And I think the characters jump to conclusions
right,
with that. But I can understand the personal motivations behind them.
right. And so now we like to go into a section that we call the zero sum game, where we're going to talk about our winners and losers, what we liked best, what we didn't like, and just wrap this book up. And so what did you like best, Mike?
The helicopter sequence. It keeps coming back to me. If I think about the book, that's the one scene I think about. I enjoyed making this map I was telling you about last episode. I hope some people found it online. We'll put the link up again in the show notes. But I just thought that was masterfully well done. What about you?
I liked all the portrayals of the FBI would do in these sort of situations, like the investigation aspect of it, as well as sort of getting a closer look at what the Secret Service would do in certain situations. So I liked all the research that went into it, all the military explanations of different scenes. You could tell that this book was, and most of his books are, all of his books are very well researched. So that's what I like the best.
And I think for our critiques on the zero sum game, there's going to be winners, there's going to be losers. We've already talked about a few of them, such as overdeveloping too many characters and their backstories using a similar device that you rely on almost too heavily. So here's a new loser for you, which I think you'll agree, but let's see. We were doing some digging and we found, thanks to a couple of great writers, The Real Book Spy is one of them, reading a couple of his old posts, and it turns out Term Limits was not the original name for this book.
Yeah, no,
But
it wasn't.
but thankfully, before it got published, and once again, Vince Flynn found his own, self-publishing company to get this off the ground. Before he went that far, to me, it was a great change. So a loser would have been the original title. You ready for it? The Right to Stand Up.
Bad
Would
title.
would that have been a winner or a loser for you?
That would have been a total loser. Not a good book title.
Do
I
you,
like Term
I
Limit
hate
so much better.
I hate to say it, but do you think going with that title for your first novel, even though the text was great, we enjoyed it, do you think that would have affected his future career? Do you think that a publisher, like he gets picked up by Pocket Books, would, for a two-part series after this comes out, do you think they would have picked up on it? I mean,
They probably pick it up and then they force him to change the title.
that's what I'm wondering though, is would have gotten that far. They definitely would have gone over changing the title. You know what else got changed actually over time? I was looking at the different cover artwork because I read the Kindle version and I had an old Kindle version and I didn't realize there were two different ones. And so I got two different titles, two different covers, excuse me, which caused me to dig in. So for winners and losers, we've got 5 book covers that we found were the most common publications. What worked for you, Chris? Which one comes out on top?
I really like the guy running. You can kind of imagine this scene like whenever you're reading a part in the book. The ones with the
Okay.
crosshairs, like I don't know, they don't age well.
I don't know. I mean, just to describe, we also have these gray monotones. So it looks like these great monolith stone structures and a waxed marble floor, and this character is running, wearing a black suit. So I'm like, is this Secret Service? Is this supposed to be Michael O'Rourke?
I guess it's
I'm just
Michael O'Rourke running through what would be the Lincoln Memorial. Is that the Washington Monument in the background? But there's never a scene where that happens, so maybe I don't like this one.
Yeah, I see the reflecting pool, and he's running through the Lincoln Memorial. I'm like, who's running? Where are they going? When was this in the story? No action took place really near the Lincoln. I
No,
was just thrown off. I guess there were a series of covers similar to this, but I just don't know if that's going to work as a theme for these covers. And then I'm going to disagree with you. The two original versions, the 1997 Cloak and Dagger Press and the 1997-98 Pocket Books edition, I'm digging the crosshairs on the Capitol, on the dome, in your face. I'm like, this is going to have some action. I can get into this. Now, crosshairs on the Capitol building, knowing the last 20 or so years of history, particularly a pre 9/11 publication, by a number of
right,
years.
right.
I understand where you're coming from with not aging well, but come on, man. How much stuff happens in these books that is just completely insensitive and off the chain? And we can handle a little crosshairs on the Capitol building.
I mean, it definitely is like you walking through a bookstore and you see that, you're like, I'm gonna pick that up.
Whoa. Whoa.
Versus like just seeing, the flag waving in the Capitol building and something that says term limits. I might think it's actually like a book on the history of term limits instead of
True.
like an action thriller. So
Yeah. I'm still thinking, why is this guy running? Where's he going?
and why is he running through the Lincoln Memorial? So yeah,
You
I don't
know,
like that one. I'm gonna go with your choice too.
well, the other two options that came up, and I'm going to say the 2005 one's nice. It seems to me this was part of an attempt to mainstream the covers a little bit and kind of align them with future publications and kind of go back and make them all similar. We get basically the red and white stripes of the flag horizontally going across the cover of the book. We get the Capitol building in the middle. And I feel like that red theme works. It's kind of making me think of some of the books that came out with similar covers, and it creates this link between this first book, which doesn't even have Mitch Rapp, and later books in the series, at least trying to get some continuity or some visual recognition by later readers to go back and maybe look at this one and say, oh, that's familiar to the series that I'm comfortable reading.
Right. All right. So Mike, what is your overall ranking of this book? You can give me a letter score, Goodreads score, 1 out of 10, all three, whatever.
I mean, first on Goodreads, if I like the book and I support the author, it's always 5 out of 5. To me, it's not too hard to get 5 out of 5 on Goodreads. That just shows I want to show the public this is worth your time and appreciate the author's craft. But if
Right.
I were to do a deeper analysis on a rating scale, I'd have to sit around a B. I think
Yeah.
I can go up to a B plus, definitely on certain areas. So I'm sitting on that fence from a B plus. How about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I'd go B, or out of 10, I'd say 7. And like you said, on Goodreads, probably 4.5 range for me. So something that is worthy. I feel like people should pick it up and read it. So yeah,
Well, how about this? If you were to project out as we reread the books throughout this series, I hope to keep a running tally of where this falls. It's not a Mitch Rapp series, right? So this one's kind of the oddball out, but are you talking, will it crack your top 5? Remember there's 19 books. We're about to get number 20 in this September. Is it cracking the top 5? Is it bottom 5? For me, it's got to be somewhere floating in the middle. Floating dead center in the middle, maybe the lower end, just because I know how great later ones are going to be, but
yeah,
definitely around
it's
there.
definitely not in the top 5. And hopefully we'll be able to do, once we get some of these under our belts, we can do like a part of the podcast where we do our rankings, our favorites. But yeah, it's definitely sort of in the middle. I would agree with that.
Yep, yep, yep.
Middle, lower middle. So
Well, those are our thoughts on the book. So reach out on Twitter. Let us know what you think with the handle at MitchRappPod. You can also find us at MitchRappPod.com. And please subscribe using your favorite podcasting platform.
next time we're going to be covering a special constitutional deep dive. So make sure you check out for that. And as always, just let Mitch be Mitch. Guys, we're just simply two fans offering a discussion and reviews of some of our favorite books and characters. This podcast is not officially affiliated with Vince Flynn, Kyle Mills, or Simon & Schuster. But thank you to them for bringing us this wonderful world of Mitch Rapp.